Ahenkorah, driven by desperation and the humiliation of losing his wealth and status, decided he was ready to sacrifice his mother once and for all. Ahenkorah sat in his opulent home, his heart heavy with the weight of his mother's desperate plea. Her words had pierced through the facade of wealth and success he had carefully constructed, leaving him tormented by the impossible choice before him. Should he ignore his family's suffering and adhere to the Grand Master's warning, or should he risk everything to help those he loved most? The thought of his mother in pain was too much to bear. Ahenkorah knew he couldn't stand by and let her suffer, no matter the consequences. Driven by love and a sense of duty, he made the fateful decision to defy the Grand Master's warning. He sent money to his sister Mansa with instructions to take their mother to the hospital and cover any other necessary expenses. As he sent the money, Ahenkorah felt a mix of relief and dread. He knew that by choosing to help his family, he might be inviting the wrath of the powers that had given him his wealth. But he also knew that some things were worth more than money. His mother's life and the bond of family that no amount of riches could replace. 3 days after sending the money to his sister, Ahenkorah's life took a terrifying turn. Sleep, once a refuge, became a living nightmare. Every time he tried to close his eyes, he was haunted by dark spirits, chased by terrifying monsters that seemed to emerge from the depths of his worst fears. Their guttural shouts echoed in his ears, reverberating with the anger of the forces he had defied. The terror was relentless, and Ahenkorah soon realized that confronting the Grandmaster was not an option. The fear of what might happen if he admitted to his transgression paralyzed him. Instead, he sought refuge in the night, desperate to escape the torment that awaited him whenever he tried to sleep. Every night, Ahenkorah would drive aimlessly through the streets, trying to outrun his fears. He frequented nightclubs, their loud music and flashing lights, a temporary distraction from the horrors that plagued him. On other nights, he would sip cup after cup of coffee, forcing himself to stay awake until dawn. The fear of sleep was so overwhelming that he chose the exhausting alternative of never resting. Yet, amid this turmoil, something strange happened. Unlike the first time he had defied the Grandmaster's warnings, there was no drop in his financial status. The money continued to flow, and his wealth remained untouched, even though he was now supporting his family financially. This perplexed Ahenkorah, who couldn't understand why his defiance hadn't led to the financial ruin he had expected. But the continuation of his wealth did little to ease his mind. The fear, the sleepless nights, and the constant dread of what might come next weighed heavily on him. Ahenkorah was trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty, his wealth no longer a source of comfort, but a constant reminder of the dark forces that governed his life. The riches he once sought now seemed insignificant compared to the peace and rest he so desperately craved. One fateful night, Ahenkorah's exhaustion finally caught up with him. The relentless sleeplessness, the constant fear, and the tormenting nightmares had drained him to the point where he could no longer fight it. His body, worn out by the endless cycle of anxiety and fatigue, succumbed to sleep despite his attempts to resist. As he drifted into unconsciousness, Ahenkorah found himself in the grip of a terrifying dream. He was running through a dense forest, the trees casting ominous shadows all around him. His heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted, feeling the presence of something monstrous and inhuman close behind. The creature, a giant with a grotesque human-like form, pursued him relentlessly. Ahenkorah could feel his legs moving faster than he thought possible, but no matter how hard he ran, the creature was always just a step away. The terror intensified as the creature finally caught up with him. Ahenkorah's desperate cries for help echoed through the empty forest, but no one answered. The monstrous being grabbed him with terrifying strength and dragged him to a large, gnarled tree. With a force that made him shudder in pain, the creature tied him to the tree, its cold, unfeeling eyes locked onto him. Ahenkorah's fear reached a fever pitch as the creature raised its hand, extending a single sharp finger. It began to pierce his back, the pain excruciating as it drove deep into his flesh, reaching his very bones. The agony was unlike anything he had ever felt, and in his desperation, Ahenkorah cried out, "Jesus! Jesus! Jesus!" The sound of his own voice seemed to echo in the dream, filling the air with a desperate plea for salvation. Suddenly, Ahenkorah woke up, jolted out of his nightmare. His heart raced and sweat drenched his body as he tried to catch his breath. But the fear didn't end with his awakening. A strange, intense, itching sensation began in the exact spot where the creature had pierced him in the dream. The itch was irresistible, and Ahenkorah instinctively reached back to scratch it, desperate for relief. At first, the scratching provided a strange, almost pleasurable sensation, as if it was soothing the residual pain from the nightmare. But as he continued, something felt wrong. Ahenkorah's fingers brushed against something wet, and when he pulled his hand back, he was horrified to see blood smeared across his fingers. The itching persisted, and as he looked in the mirror, he saw that his back was indeed bleeding from a wound that seemed to mirror the one inflicted in his dream. Fear gripped him once more as he realized the nightmare had crossed into reality. The mysterious wound, the bleeding, and the connection to his dream all pointed to something far more sinister than he had ever imagined. The line between the spiritual and physical realms had blurred, and Ahenkorah was left to grapple with the horrifying consequences of his actions, not knowing what dark forces he had truly unleashed. As Ahenkorah stared at the blood on his fingers, a wave of dread washed over him. The reality of the situation began to sink in. This was no ordinary nightmare. Something far more sinister was at play, something that transcended the physical and entered the realm of the spiritual. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. He slumped down onto the edge of his bed, his hands trembling as he buried his face in them. The room was silent, but inside his head, a storm of thoughts and emotions raged. For the first time, he began to truly confront the gravity of his choices. "What have I done?" he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the night. "Why did I ever get involved with the Grand Master? How could I let things go this far?" He clenched his fists, feeling the sting of his own nails digging into his palms. The pain was a small distraction from the torment gnawing at his conscience. He thought of his mother, Auntie Boatemaa, who had always been his guiding light, the one who sacrificed everything for her children. And now, because of his decisions, she was suffering, possibly paying the ultimate price for his greed. Tears welled up in his eyes as he continued to speak to himself, the words coming out in a broken stream of regret. "I should have listened to her. I should have known better. Money isn't worth this. None of this is worth it. I've let down the people I love the most. How could I have been so blind?" He thought back to the Grand Master's warning, the sinister smile that had played on his lips as he spoke of the price that must be paid. Ahenkorah had thought he could handle it, that the benefits outweighed the costs. But now he realized just how wrong he had been. The wealth, the luxury, the power, it all felt hollow in comparison to the love and peace he had lost. "What if something happens to Ma?" he asked himself, his voice breaking. "What if she doesn't make it? I can't live with that. I can't. The thought of losing his mother, the one person who had always stood by him, was unbearable. He knew he was walking a dangerous path, one that could lead to unimaginable consequences. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to continue down this road. Ahenkorah wiped his tears with the back of his hand, but they kept coming. He felt the itching in his back intensify, a stark reminder of the wound inflicted in his dream, a wound that was now very real. The blood continued to seep from it, as if his very soul was leaking out with it. Ahenkorah knew he couldn't ignore the signs any longer. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked himself, his voice trembling. "Do I go back to the Grand Master? Do I beg for forgiveness? Or do I try to break free from this curse on my own?" But deep down, Ahenkorah knew the truth. There were no easy answers and no simple way out. He had made a deal with forces far beyond his understanding, and now he was paying the price. The weight of his decisions pressed down on him, suffocating him with guilt and fear. "I'm so sorry, Ma," he whispered, his voice breaking as tears streamed down his face. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to help." As days passed, the sore on Ahenkorah's back continued to spread, becoming more painful and emitting a foul odor. Each day the wound grew worse despite his efforts to care for it. Meanwhile, his mother, Auntie Boatemaa, was surprisingly recovering from her illness, gaining strength with each passing day. The contrast between his deteriorating condition and his mother's recovery weighed heavily on Ahenkorah. The pain in his back became unbearable, and the smell was so pungent that it filled the room, making it impossible to ignore. Ahenkorah's shame and fear grew as the wound worsened. The stench was overwhelming, and he became increasingly self-conscious about it. He began avoiding public places, too embarrassed by the odor that clung to him, despite his best efforts to mask it with strong perfumes. The once confident and wealthy Ahenkorah now lived in isolation, haunted by the consequences of his choices. The physical pain was relentless, but the emotional toll was even greater as he watched his mother recover while he continued to suffer. Ahenkorah realized that the price of his decisions was higher than he had ever imagined. He was paying with his health, his dignity, and his peace of mind, trapped in a body that was deteriorating just as quickly as his spirit. Unable to bear the pain any longer, Ahenkorah finally decided to seek help from his friend Stagger. Desperate for relief, he asked Stagger to take him back to the Grandmaster so he could apologize for his mistakes. Stagger, understanding the gravity of the situation, agreed to accompany him. When they arrived at the Grandmaster's place, the moment the Grandmaster saw them, he started laughing, a deep, ominous sound that sent chills down Ahenkorah's spine. It was as if the Grandmaster already knew the torment Ahenkorah was enduring. Without missing a beat, the Grandmaster asked, "You are dying, right? You are in pain, right?" Ahenkorah was taken aback by the Grandmaster's words, the accuracy of his statement hitting him like a blow. "Yes, please, I'm dying, Grandmaster," Ahenkorah admitted, his voice filled with desperation and fear. The Grandmaster's laughter subsided as he leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "It's normal," he said calmly, almost dismissively. "You see, you have a choice to make. Either you save your mother and sacrifice your own life, or you save your life and sacrifice your mother. The choice is yours, Ahenkorah, but if you want to save yourself, you must stop feeding your mother with your money." The weight of the Grandmaster's words settled heavily on Ahenkorah. The decision before him was a cruel and impossible one. Either he continued to support his mother, knowing it would lead to his own death, or he abandoned her to save himself. The gravity of his choices had never been clearer, and the realization filled him with dread. The very wealth he had sought to protect his family was now the source of their potential destruction. Ahenkorah was trapped between his love for his mother and his instinct for self-preservation, knowing that whatever choice he made, someone he loved would suffer. As Ahenkorah and Stagger left the Grandmaster's place, the weight of the Grandmaster's words hung heavily between them. Ahenkorah's mind was in turmoil, torn between his deep love for his mother and the primal instinct to save his own life. The silence between the two friends was finally broken when Stagger spoke up, his tone measured but firm. "Ahenkorah, listen to me," Stagger began, glancing over at his troubled friend. "I know this is the hardest decision you'll ever have to make, but you have to think clearly. Your life is more important than your mother's right now." Ahenkorah turned to Stagger, confusion and pain written across his face. "How can you say that, Stagger? She's my mother. She sacrificed everything for me. How can I just abandon her now, when she needs me the most?" Stagger sighed, understanding the depth of Ahenkorah's conflict. "I get it, Ahenkorah. I really do. But think about our traditions. A mother shouldn't have to bury her son. It's supposed to be the other way around. If you die, your mother will not only lose you, but she'll also lose the will to live. The pain of losing a child, it's unbearable. You've seen how much she loves you. Do you think she'd want you to sacrifice your life for hers?" Ahenkorah looked down, his heart heavy with the truth of Stagger's words. "But if I stop taking care of her, it feels like I'm killing her myself," he whispered, his voice breaking. Stagger placed a hand on Ahenkorah's shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "I know it feels that way, but your mother would do anything to see you survive. She'd sacrifice her own life to save yours. Any mother would. If you continue down this path, you're risking both your lives. And if you die first, the grief might kill her anyway. She wouldn't be able to bear it." Ahenkorah wiped a tear from his eye, struggling to accept the harsh reality. "But what if I stop and she dies because of it? How can I live with that guilt?" Stagger shook his head gently. "You have to trust that your mother would want you to live. It's the hardest choice, but it's the only one that gives both of you a chance. If you stop now, you might survive, and that way you can keep her memory alive. Honor her sacrifices by living the life she wanted for you." Ahenkorah nodded slowly, the words sinking in. He knew Stagger was right, even if it tore him apart inside. "You're right. I can't let my life end like this. I have to survive. For her." After that conversation, Ahenkorah made the agonizing decision to stop supporting his family financially, distancing himself from them in a desperate attempt to save his own life. The decision haunted him, but as days passed, he noticed that the sore on his back began to heal. The unbearable pain lessened, and the foul smell that had kept him isolated slowly faded. The physical relief was a stark contrast to the emotional burden he carried, knowing that his decision could mean the loss of his mother. But for now, Ahenkorah's life was spared, and with it, the hope that he might find a way to make things right before it was too late. After Ahenkorah made the difficult decision to cut off his family, he went so far as to change his phone number and sever all contact with his mother, sister, and brother. Weeks passed, and the weight of his choice grew heavier. His mother's condition, which had initially improved, took a sharp turn for the worse. This time she was gravely ill, far more serious than before. Mansa and Badu, desperate and worried, tried repeatedly to reach Ahenkorah, but his phone was always off. With no money left for medical care and their mother's condition deteriorating rapidly, Badu made a bold decision. He would find his brother in Koforidua and bring him back home, no matter what it took. After a long and exhausting journey, Badu finally traced Ahenkorah's residence. When he arrived, he was stunned by the sight before him. A grand mansion, surrounded by high walls and security guards. The life of luxury his brother was living was beyond anything Badu could have imagined, especially when their family was struggling so desperately back in Subum. Determined to speak with his brother, Badu approached the security officers at the gate. "Please, I need to see my brother Ahenkorah. It's urgent. It's about our mother." The security officer looked Badu up and down, noticing his disheveled appearance and humble attire. "Who are you?" he asked, skeptical. "I'm his brother, Badu," anxiety creeping into his voice. "Please, I have to talk to him. Our mother is dying." The security officer nodded slowly and went inside to relay the message. After a few minutes he returned, his expression unchanged. "Mr. Ahenkorah is not at home," he said flatly. "You'll have to leave." Badu's heart sank. He knew the guard was lying, that Ahenkorah was inside, refusing to see him. Desperation washed over him as he pleaded, "Please, I know he's in there. Just tell him I need to see him. Our mother is seriously ill. She might not make it." But the security officer remained unmoved. "I'm sorry. You need to leave the premises." With no other choice, Badu turned away, his mind racing with disbelief and anger. He didn't even have enough money to return to Subum and was forced to beg strangers for a few cedis to get back home. Each step he took away from the mansion deepened his sense of betrayal. When Badu finally reached home, he was exhausted and devastated. Mansa rushed to him, seeing the pain in his eyes. "Badu, what happened? Did you see Ahenkorah? Is he coming?" Badu shook his head, bitterness filling his voice. "No, Mansa. He refused to see me. He told the security to send me away like I'm a stranger, not his brother." Mansa's face fell, her heart breaking at the thought of their mother's worsening condition. "But why, Badu? Why would he do that? Doesn't he care that Mama is dying?" Badu looked at his sister, a mix of sorrow and anger in his eyes. "Mansa, I saw the life Ahenkorah is living. He has a huge mansion, security guards, everything. We're here struggling, and he's living in luxury. I think he might be involved in something dark, maybe even an occult society. How else could he be living like that while we suffer? It's like he's abandoned us. Like he doesn't care if Mama dies." Mansa gasped, her mind reeling at the implications. "Badu, are you saying Ahenkorah could be the reason Mama is sick?" Badu nodded solemnly. "It's possible. Everything points to it. He's changed, Mansa. He's not the brother we knew. He might know something about what's happening to Mama, but he's not telling us. And now she might die because of it." Mansa nodded, wiping away her tears. "You're right, Badu. We'll do whatever it takes to save her. Mama raised us to be strong, and we won't let her down." They knew they were up against something far greater than they could understand, but they were determined to fight for their mother's life, even if it meant standing alone against the darkness. Even though Ahenkorah had chosen to ignore his dying mother, the guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. He knew deep down that he was the one responsible for his mother's suffering, using her as a sacrificial tool in his quest for wealth. This realization tormented him, creating a constant, unbearable inner conflict. Despite his increasing wealth, Ahenkorah couldn't shake the deep sorrow and guilt that consumed him. Every time he looked at the money, he felt a pang of regret, knowing it was built on the pain of the one person who had always loved him unconditionally. Ahenkorah was dying inside, the weight of his actions crushing his spirit. No amount of money could ease the burden he carried, and the more he tried to distract himself, the more the guilt intensified. Meanwhile, his mother's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her body weakened to the brink of death. As her life force ebbed away, the severity of her illness only seemed to amplify Ahenkorah's wealth. With each passing day, as his mother grew weaker and the family sank further into poverty, Ahenkorah's riches increased exponentially. The connection between his mother's suffering and his financial success became glaringly obvious, adding layers of torment to his already fragile conscience. The wealth that poured in did nothing to alleviate Ahenkorah's pain. In fact, it only served as a constant reminder of the price he had paid, the life of his mother. He couldn't escape the irony of his situation. The richer he became, the more he lost touch with the very essence of who he once was. The emptiness within him grew, mirroring the emptiness of his grand mansion and the hollow life he now led. Each night, as he lay in his opulent bed, surrounded by luxuries that should have brought him joy, Ahenkorah felt nothing but despair. The man who had once dreamed of lifting his family out of poverty was now the reason for their suffering. His mother's impending death was on his hands, and no amount of wealth could ever erase that guilt. Ahenkorah's outward success became a mask he wore to hide the agony that consumed him. But deep down, he knew that as long as his mother continued to suffer, he would never find peace. The price of his decisions had been far too high, and the weight of that truth was slowly killing him, even as it filled his coffers with more wealth than he had ever imagined. Badu and Mansa, desperate to save their mother, had reached the end of their tether. With the doctors unable to provide any solutions and their mother's condition worsening by the day, they knew they had to try something different, something beyond conventional medicine. They decided to seek help from a popular prophet in Ghana, known for his spiritual insight and healing powers. When they arrived at the prophet's church, they were welcomed with compassion and understanding. The prophet listened intently as Badu and Mansa explained their mother's deteriorating condition and the series of unfortunate events that had plagued their family. After hearing their story, the prophet agreed to pray for their mother, believing that her illness might have a spiritual cause. During the prayer session, the atmosphere was charged with intensity as the prophet sought divine guidance. As he prayed over their mother, the prophet suddenly paused, his expression growing serious. He seemed to be seeing something beyond the physical realm. After a moment of silence, he looked at Badu and Mansa with a grave expression. "There is something in your home," the prophet said, his voice filled with certainty. "The Lord has revealed to me that there is a hidden object in one of your rooms, something that is linked to your mother's suffering." Badu and Mansa exchanged worried glances, unsure of what the prophet meant. "What kind of object, prophet?" Mansa asked, her voice trembling with fear and curiosity. "I do not know yet," the prophet replied, his tone firm but compassionate. "But I can tell you that whatever it is, it holds a dark power that is affecting your mother. The Lord has shown me that this object is connected to the spiritual forces that are attacking her." Badu felt a chill run down his spine. "What should we do, prophet?" he asked, his voice filled with urgency. "How can we save her?" The prophet nodded, understanding their desperation. "I will come to your home in a week's time," he said. "During that visit, I will offer prayers and ask the Lord to reveal to us what is hidden in your house. Once we uncover it, we can take the necessary steps to break its power and free your mother from its influence." Mansa and Badu agreed, feeling a mixture of hope and anxiety. They thanked the prophet for his help and promised to prepare for his visit. As they left the church, they couldn't help but wonder what hidden force could be lurking in their home, contributing to their mother's suffering. They were determined to find out and do whatever it took to save her. Over the next week, Badu and Mansa focused on caring for their mother, who continued to grow weaker. The anticipation of the prophet's visit weighed heavily on their minds. They knew that whatever the prophet found could be the key to understanding and possibly reversing the curse that had fallen upon their family. As the days passed, they couldn't shake the feeling that their brother Ahenkorah might somehow be connected to the dark forces at play. But for now, they put their suspicions aside, focusing instead on the hope that the prophet's prayers would bring the answers they so desperately needed. A week later, the much-anticipated day arrived, and the prophet visited Badu and Mansa's home. The atmosphere in the house was tense, a mixture of hope and fear hanging in the air. The prophet, with a calm and determined demeanor, prepared to lead the family in prayer once more, seeking divine guidance to uncover the source of their mother's suffering. The family gathered in the room where their mother lay, frail and barely conscious. The prophet began to pray, his voice resonating with authority as he called upon the Lord to reveal the hidden forces at work. The air seemed to grow heavier, and a sense of anticipation filled the room. As the prayers continued, the prophet suddenly stopped, his eyes closed in deep concentration. After a few moments of silence, he spoke, his voice filled with certainty. "There is something hidden in this room," he said, his tone serious. "The Lord has revealed to me that an object in this room is linked to the spiritual attack on your mother. It holds a dark power that must be broken." Badu and Mansa exchanged anxious glances. "What kind of object, prophet?" Badu asked, his voice trembling. The prophet looked at them with a thoughtful expression. "Have you received any gifts from someone recently? Something that may have been brought into this house?" The siblings were momentarily puzzled, trying to recall if they had received any gifts. They shook their heads, unable to remember anything specific. The prophet continued to pray, and the silence in the room deepened as the family racked their brains, searching for an answer. Suddenly, Mansa's eyes widened as a memory came flooding back. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling. "There was a cloth. Ahenkorah, our brother, gave it to our mother. It was a beautiful piece of cloth, richly patterned. He said it was a gift, but we didn't think much of it at the time." The prophet's eyes narrowed as he listened. "Where is this cloth now?" he asked. Mansa quickly got up and went to the chest where the cloth was stored. She pulled it out, her hands shaking as she held it up for the prophet to see. "This is it, prophet," she said, her voice filled with a mix of fear and disbelief. "This is the cloth Ahenkorah gave to our mother." The prophet looked at the cloth with a discerning gaze. "Bring it to me," he instructed. Mansa hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked over and handed the cloth to the prophet. He took it carefully, holding it in his hands as he closed his eyes once more. The room was silent as everyone waited, their hearts pounding in their chests. After a moment, the prophet opened his eyes and nodded slowly. "This cloth is the source of the darkness that has plagued your mother," he said with certainty. "It was given with the intention of harm, carrying a curse that has been affecting her ever since it entered your home. The Lord has revealed that this cloth must be destroyed if your mother is to be freed from its influence." Mansa and Badu were stunned. They had never imagined that a simple gift from their brother could be the cause of such suffering. The reality of their situation hit them hard. Ahenkorah, the brother they loved and trusted, had unknowingly brought this curse into their lives. "What do we do now, Prophet?" Badu asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Prophet looked at them with compassion. "We must destroy this cloth immediately," he said firmly. "Only then can your mother begin to heal." The siblings nodded, their resolve strengthening. They were ready to do whatever it took to save their mother, even if it meant confronting the painful truth about their brother's involvement. After the pastor burnt the cursed cloth, it was as if a miraculous transformation occurred. Ahenkorah's mother, who had been bedridden and unable to speak for so long, suddenly felt an immense sense of relief, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from her soul. The pain that had plagued her for months evaporated, and she found herself able to move, to talk, and even to walk again. It was nothing short of a miracle, and the family was overcome with tears of joy. The pastor, seeing their dire financial state, generously gave them money to take their mother to the hospital for further treatment. For Badu, Mansa, and their mother, it was a moment of profound happiness. After months of suffering and despair, they were finally witnessing the light at the end of the tunnel. Their mother's recovery felt like a blessing, and they were filled with gratitude for the pastor's intervention. However, as their mother's health improved, Ahenkorah's life took a dramatic turn for the worse. Almost immediately after the cloth was burnt, Ahenkorah began to feel a deep sense of unease. It was as if something was terribly wrong, a feeling of dread that gnawed at him constantly. His online fraud activities, which had previously brought him immense wealth, started to falter. Clients who had once been eager to send him money suddenly stopped. Day by day, Ahenkorah's income dried up, and he found himself losing huge sums of money. At first, Ahenkorah couldn't understand what was happening. He had been at the peak of his success, living a life of luxury that few could even dream of. But now, it all seemed to be slipping away from him, and no matter what he did, he couldn't stop the downward spiral. Desperate to maintain his lifestyle, he began selling off his properties, his cars, his mansion, and his expensive possessions. Each sale brought in money, but it was never enough to stem the tide of financial ruin that was overtaking him. As his mother continued to recover, gaining strength and vitality with each passing day, Ahenkorah's situation worsened. The contrast between his mother's newfound health and his own deteriorating circumstances was stark. The wealth he had once taken for granted was vanishing before his eyes, and within 6 months, Ahenkorah found himself stripped of everything he had once owned. With his properties sold off and his bank accounts depleted, Ahenkorah was forced to move out of his grand mansion and into a modest rented apartment. The man who had once been known for his opulence and power was now living a life of quiet desperation, his fortune gone and his reputation in tatters. As he sat in his small apartment, Ahenkorah couldn't help but reflect on the choices that had led him to this point. He had sacrificed everything, his family, his integrity, and his peace of mind, for the pursuit of wealth, only to lose it all in the end. The guilt that had plagued him for so long now weighed even heavier on his shoulders, as he realized that the very thing that had saved his mother's life had also been the catalyst for his downfall. In the end, Ahenkorah was left with nothing but his regrets, a stark reminder of the price he had paid for his misguided ambitions. His mother, who had suffered so much because of his actions, was now the one thriving, while he was the one left to bear the consequences of his choices. After losing everything, Ahenkorah, desperate and broken, made his way back to the Grandmaster, hoping to find a way to regain his lost wealth. But, to his shock, the Grandmaster, who had always been able to see into the spiritual realm with uncanny accuracy, seemed completely blind to what had gone wrong. It was as if a veil had been drawn over the situation, preventing the Grandmaster from understanding the true cause of Ahenkorah's downfall. Unbeknownst to both of them, the power of God was at work, shielding the truth from the Grandmaster's dark powers. Despite this, the Grandmaster gave Ahenkorah a substantial amount of money, instructing him to give it to his mother. The sinister plan was that if his mother used the money for food or anything else, it would trigger her death. Ahenkorah, driven by desperation and the humiliation of losing his wealth and status, decided he was ready to sacrifice his mother once and for all. The ridicule he faced from those who once envied him as Money Man fueled his aggression and his determination to regain his former glory at any cost. With the money from the Grandmaster in hand, Ahenkorah hired a car to return to his hometown of Subum. His arrival was meant to be a triumphant return, a signal to everyone that he was still powerful and wealthy. However, when he arrived at his family home, he was met with a sight that stopped him in his tracks. His mother, whom he had expected to find weak and near death, was instead healthy and vibrant, even strong enough to go to the farm. The transformation was astonishing, and Ahenkorah could hardly believe his eyes. His siblings, Mansa and Badu, were there as well, but they remained silent, their expressions guarded. His mother welcomed him warmly, as if nothing had changed, despite all the pain he had caused by abandoning them. This reception was not what Ahenkorah had expected, and it threw him off balance. Swallowing his pride, Ahenkorah apologized for his actions, for ignoring his family and leaving them to suffer while he pursued his wealth. He promised that he had changed and vowed to take care of them from now on. His mother, ever compassionate, accepted his apology, though there was an unspoken understanding in the room that much had been broken that could not easily be mended. After spending a few hours with his family, Ahenkorah prepared to return to Koforidua. Before leaving, he tried to give the money from the Grandmaster to his mother, hoping to fulfill the dark plan that would bring about her death. But to his surprise and dismay, his mother gently refused the money. "No, Ahenkorah," she said softly, "we don't need your money. We have enough, and we are doing just fine." Determined, Ahenkorah turned to his siblings, trying to give them the money instead. But both Mansa and Badu shook their heads, refusing to accept anything from him. Their silence was powerful, filled with the knowledge of what had truly transpired and the understanding of where this money had come from. Rejected by his own family, Ahenkorah was left standing there, the weight of his failure and shame crushing him. The money, once a symbol of his power, had become a reminder of the emptiness that his pursuit of wealth had brought him. Unable to say anything more, he turned and left, the money still clutched in his hand, knowing he had been defeated not by poverty, but by the strength and integrity of his family. As he drove back to Koforidua, Ahenkorah couldn't shake the feeling that he had truly lost everything: his wealth, his family's trust, and any chance of redemption. The Grandmaster's plan had failed, and with it, Ahenkorah's last hope of regaining the life he once had. He was left to face the harsh reality that money could not buy back what he had destroyed, and no amount of wealth could restore the relationships he had shattered. As Ahenkorah left his family behind, filled with frustration and shame, he decided to continue his journey to the Grandmaster in the same car he had hired. The drive was long and wearying, and as fate would have it, he soon found himself running low on fuel. Spotting a filling station along the way, he pulled in to refuel. His mind was clouded with anger and disappointment, but he was determined to continue his quest for wealth, no matter the cost. However, in his agitated state, Ahenkorah made a grave mistake. Instead of using his own money to pay for the fuel, he accidentally used the money that the Grandmaster had given him, the very money meant to seal his mother's fate. As he handed over the cursed money at the payment counter, he unknowingly set in motion a series of events that would seal his own. Ahenkorah suddenly felt as though he was in a different world, his thoughts racing uncontrollably, voices echoing in his head. It was like a descent into madness, as if a dark force had taken hold of him, tearing apart his sanity piece by piece. He screamed and shouted, his mind consumed by an overwhelming terror. The reality he had once known was slipping away, replaced by a chaotic and terrifying nightmare. Unable to bear the turmoil within, Ahenkorah abruptly abandoned the car at the filling station, leaving behind everything: his wealth, his pride, and his very identity. Stripped of reason and control, he began to walk aimlessly down the road, half naked and completely mad. The man once known as Money Man, who had pursued wealth at any cost, was now reduced to a pitiful figure, wandering the streets in madness. His insatiable greed had driven him to this tragic end, a stark reminder of the dangers of placing wealth above all else. As the Bible warns in 1 Timothy 6:10, "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." Ahenkorah's story was a vivid illustration of this truth, as his relentless pursuit of riches had ultimately led to his ruin. The wisdom of an old African proverb also rang true: "Quick money soon gone, but hard-earned money sticks like honey." Ahenkorah had chased after quick and easy wealth, ignoring the value of honest work and integrity. In the end, the wealth he sought slipped through his fingers, leaving him with nothing but the ashes of his former life. And as another saying goes, "Greed brings grief to the whole family, but those who hate bribes will live." Ahenkorah's greed had not only destroyed him, but had brought untold suffering to his family. The riches he had once gloried in had become a curse, leading him down a path of destruction from which there was no return. Now, as he wandered the streets, lost in madness, Ahenkorah was a living testament to the perils of greed. His story served as a solemn warning to those who would place wealth above all else, showing that the pursuit of quick riches often comes at a cost far greater than one could ever imagine. May the Lord deliver parents from the heartache of children who are led astray by the love of wealth and the pressures of their peers. May He protect them from the dangers that come when these children forget the moral teachings and values instilled by their parents, pursuing riches at the cost of their integrity. We ask that the Lord shield families from the curses, bad luck, and disasters that can befall them when greed takes root in their hearts. May He grant parents the wisdom and strength to guide their children back to the path of righteousness, and may He bless these children with the clarity to see the true worth of a life lived with integrity and love. Let the Lord's protection be upon all parents and children, keeping them safe from the destructive forces of greed and the love of wealth. May they always remain grounded in their faith, upheld by the virtues of honesty, humility, and contentment. Say Amen. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share what you've taken away from this story and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your insights are valuable and we appreciate your engagement. Thank you so much for your continued support and love for Ananse Web of Tales. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends and family, and leave a comment. Your support helps us bring you more captivating stories, and we're grateful to have you as part of our community. Keep watching for more tales that inspire, teach, and entertain. Stay blessed, and see you in the next story.